Hey, welcome back to the Budget Gourmet. And before we start this video, I just wanted to make this little intro just explaining what I do here and how I make my videos. First and foremost, starting out, I am not a professional chef. Never have been, probably never will be. I'm just a home cook trying to make some good food for my family. Just so you know that every video that you watch, it's all according sort of to my taste and how I would make it for myself. I know that's probably not how you're supposed to do it, but I'm eating it at the end of the day and it's for my family. So that's just sort of why I do the things I do and why I do it that way. If you want to try to replicate something that I made, then by all means, watch my channel, do all that shit. Just know that everything was sort of according to my taste, and I encourage you to make it according to your taste. If you think that's too much salt, too much pepper, too much whatever, just make it according to your taste. Make it how you want to make it and how you want to eat it, because you're going to be eating it at the end of the day, and that is all. So without further ado, let's just hop into this week's video where we are going to make a beef stew. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be budget, but we just all felt like beef stew. Me and my family just all felt like beef stew at the time, so I decided to make a beef stew. Let's get into it.
Okay, so for our roast beef, we have our chuck roast, our unsalted beef stock, some cornstarch, some garlic, paprika, salt, and pepper. Keep in mind, prices are subject to change depending on where you are, and they could be higher or lower. The first price is what I paid, and the second price is total price, not including tax, of course. Mashed potatoes is just potatoes, milk, and butter, and salt, of course. And finally, for Brussels sprouts, it's going to be the Brussels sprouts, honey, canola oil, salt, and pepper. Okay, so for the first part in our beef stew, we're just going to be getting some of our aromatics done. We're just going to be doing a rough chop on some of our garlic, making it a little bit bigger so it doesn't burn in the pan. So they look something like this. Next, I have a beautiful chuck roast here. I'm not a butcher or a meat expert. I'm just trying to get some of that fat off and cut it into some small pieces. As I'm cutting here, you just want to be careful of your fingers, making sure that you're paying attention to every little bit as you're moving forward. Now, I'm not going to be getting rid of all of the fat. I am going to be keeping some of it on the beef just because that fat is going to add a little bit of extra flavor, but we don't want too much to the point where it's going to be all fat. The thing you might want to pay attention to is this bit of like silvery skin. You might want to start cutting that off too, because I think I heard somewhere that that stuff isn't going to render down like actual fat is going to, and it's just going to sort of remain the same and add like a funny texture to your meat. After you've removed the fat, the next part is pretty easy. We're just going to start cubing up our meat into little bite-sized cubes like this. You can make them bigger or smaller. I like to make them a little bit bigger because once they start cooking in our broth, they're going to slowly get smaller throughout the cooking process. And I just like to have them all about the same size. Try to make them as even as possible. That way they will all cook the same. Once all of our meat has been cut, we're just going to add some salt. Make sure it is well seasoned. And then we're going to give it a little bit of a mix. And after we have our little salt mix, we're going to add our pepper, making sure to give that a good mix as well. And then after our pepper and salt have been mixed properly, we're just going to add a touch of paprika to give it that little bit of smokiness. And that is all I'm going to do for my seasoning before I start to put some of this into our Dutch oven. Okay, the first step in our little beef stew here is just getting our Dutch oven heated up. Put some oil in there. And I did something different that I've never really done before. I cut off some fat chunks and I put that into the oil to start giving that oil a little bit of a beef flavor. I'm not sure if it added too much of a beef flavor, but it seemed good and the fat got all nice and crispy and brown, and maybe it did add something into the final product, but I think it tasted good, so we're just gonna say that could be a part of the step if you want to. So now that we have our oil flavored and it's nice and beefy, we're going to put some of our beef chunks in there. We want to start that browning process on the meat. All I am doing here is just making sure that they are all laying flat and all getting that heat. Now, I watched Binging with Babish on YouTube, and he said, and I believe, that you don't have to do all of your meat. That browning process, you can just do a portion of it. So I just did a portion, and it's going to create the same sort of flavor profile. Because not only is it going to develop that rich beefy flavor in our gravy for later, it's also going to add some beautiful color as well. So once your beef is done and you remove it from the pan, you're going to see that nice, I just looked it up, that brown stuff at the bottom is called a fond. I don't know why they call it a fond, but that's what they call it. Next we're going to be adding our garlic, and we're just going to be scraping away at all of those brown little tasty particles in the bottom there. Are going to incorporate themselves into our sauce and make the flavor that much better. And next thing, we're going to be adding our beef stock. I got unsalted because I want to flavor it myself. And we're going to use this beef stock to deglaze our pan here to get even more of that gorgeous fond up from the bottom. And this is where the gravy really starts to develop. Right now, even without salt, you're going to have some beautiful, just natural flavors. We're going to put the rest of our meat in, along with our cooked meat that we already had the browning on. And all of those juices and everything are going to get mixed into our gravy. We're going to give everything a good mix. We're going to add some Worcestershire sauce, and we're just going to add our remaining beef stock, all of that, to the top of our Dutch oven, making sure we cover all of the meat. And then we are going to give that a good mix around, incorporating that Worcestershire sauce and making sure it distributes evenly. We're going to add some seasoning, a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper. We're going to put it to sleep, and we'll see you in a couple hours. Our first accoutrement we're going to make is some mashed potatoes. Get yourself a plastic bag, just because it makes cleanup a little bit easier. Pretty self-explanatory. We're just going to peel our potatoes. You do it however you want to do it. I'm doing it this way. I just like to make things a little easier for myself by getting the plastic bag. Why? Because that's a lot of walking from back and forth to the trash can, and I don't want to be doing too much when I'm cooking like that. Easy cleanup. Boom. There you go. Next thing, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be cutting our potatoes into bite-sized pieces. We're trying to make our potatoes all around the same size. Why? Because we want to have an even, velvety, consistent potato. We're cutting them the same size because that way they are all going to cook around the same time. You're not going to have a potato that's undercooked. You're not going to have another section of potato that's overcooked. We just want nice, evenly cooked, smooth potatoes. We're going to put the taters on the fire. We're going to fill our water just above the potatoes so it boils a little bit quicker. Add a pinch of salt in there. Make sure they're seasoned up nice and right. And then we're just going to cover them up and boil them. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to make some Brussels sprouts because I needed one healthy element. Easy, cut them in half like this. Make sure you wash them before because you don't want any sort of nasty germs on there. Just going to coat them with some oil, some pepper, and a little bit of salt as well. We're going to give that a good mix, making sure we're distributing the season evenly. Nobody gets left out here. Now, this was a faux pas on my part. I laid the Brussels sprouts down like this. I wish I would have done them the other way because I think it would have just tasted better overall. They sort of got crunchy on the outside and boiled on the inside this way. Maybe if I would have done that and there would have been that little bit of space in between, they would have gotten crunchy all around, but it's neither here nor there. After you lay them all out, we're just going to put a little bit of honey drizzle on them, giving that little bit of sweetness. Just keep an eye out on these in the oven. With all of that honey in there, it could potentially start to burn the Brussels sprouts. Just make sure that you're watching them very closely and give them a good mix. It has been 2.5 hours, and I believe we are done. We're going to check. You can see that our liquid has reduced, that beef has become super tender. Next, an important step in the process is seasoning to taste. After I tasted, I realized it needed a little bit more salt, and after I add the salt and give everything a good mix, I am then going to be tasting again. The point of this is to balance out the flavor, I believe, to your taste. Why? Because you're going to be eating it. I realized it was a little bit too salty. I did have some extra beef stock on hand, which I added a little bit more to our Dutch oven, and that helped to balance out the flavor immensely to the point where I thought it was perfect. Gave everything a good mix. We're going to put our cornstarch slurry in. This is going to thicken our sauce into that beautiful, beautiful gravy. Next thing, we're going to get our accoutrements ready. Mashed potatoes are done. I'm just going to be adding some butter. And we're going to be slowly adding in our milk here because we don't want our mashed potatoes to become runny. You can mash them however you want to. I am using a potato masher. You can use your hands, your feet. Just be careful on what you do. Adding a little bit more milk. They were a little bit too rough. Some more butter because, extra calories. And we're going to have that smooth texture all the way through. Next, we're just going to assemble. Pretty self-explanatory. Got our mashed potatoes, fluffy like a cloud, and our beautiful, slow roasted beef with our gravy. And you'll see in a second here our Brussels sprouts, which are so-so. Anyway, guys, that's it for this week's video. Stay tuned to the end to see a food review by my toughest food critic, and he will let you know how the food tasted. I will see you guys next week with another video. Goodbye.